The article I selected to analyze was Shakespeare in the Bush by Laura Bohannon. The story follows an American anthropologist who travels to West Africa and tells the Tiv people the story of Shakespeare's Hamlet. Although the narrator believes the play has a universal meaning, the Tiv elders interpret it through their own beliefs. Their different perspectives show that culture and worldview shape how people understand stories, proving that there really is no single universal interpretation. The narrator believes that Shakespeare's Hamlet has just one universal meaning before he travels to Africa, but the Tiv people interpret the play according to their own beliefs and customs once he gets there. For example, they see Hamlet's father's ghost as witchcraft. They believe Hamlet is wrong in the play to seek revenge on his uncle, since family disputes should be handled by elder relatives. By the end of the article, the narrator realizes that the Tiv are not misunderstanding the story. They are just simply viewing it through their own cultural perspective. The article teaches that people's beliefs, values, and experiences really influence how they understand literature and the world around them. An ethnocentric bias is the tendency to use one's own culture as the standard to judge another. One example of this bias in the article is the narrator's belief at the beginning that Shakespeare's Hamlet has one meaning. The narrator assumes that the English understanding of the play is the standard against which everyone else's interpretation should be measured. This reflects the narrator's Western worldview and where he comes from, which values Shakespeare as a universal work of literature and assumes that its meaning should be obvious to other cultures. This bias becomes clear when the narrator is surprised by the Tiv elders and how they interpret the play differently. The narrator repeatedly tries to correct their interpretations, showing an assumption that the English version of the story is the only correct version. The Tiv elders respond to him and they explain that they just don't agree with the story according to their own customs, and even suggest that the narrator has misunderstood it because of the lack of his knowledge for their culture. The narrator finally realizes that interpretation is shaped by culture and there is no single worldview that is a right or wrong meaning. This story is a perfect example of how people from different cultures interpret the same events in different ways. At the beginning, the narrator believes that the English interpretation of Hamlet is universal and that everyone will understand the play in the same way as he would, or as he does. However, the Tiv elders interpret the story their own way, which leads to all these different conclusions. By the end of the story, the narrator finally comes to this realization that they are not wrong, they're just viewing it through their own cultural lens. The story teaches that no culture has the correct way of understanding the world. In this story in particular, what seems normal, moral, or logical in one society may seem different or unusual in another. It encourages readers like myself to question their own assumptions and just appreciate cultural differences in different cultures around us, and recognize that understanding another culture requires an open mind rather than judging it and by the standards of our own culture. In American culture, it is customary to tip servers at restaurants because tips are an important part of a server's income. When I was researching this, I thought it was interesting to see that tipping in Asia could be considered almost insulting because their culture automatically expects this exceptional service regarding whether they make an extra tip or not. However, in America, it's a part of our culture and is a normal thing here, and it's expected that you tip. Just these two different cultures are very different, and someone in Asia, for example, might think it's just unnecessary or would be confused why you have to tip someone for services. The best practice I can propose for communicating across cultures is to approach conversations with openness and avoid assuming that your own beliefs are the only correct way to go about a situation. People interpret ideas, behaviors, and stories through their own cultural worldview, so asking questions and listening carefully can help prevent these misunderstandings. The article demonstrates this when the narrator tells the Tiff elders the story of Hamlet. The narrator expects them to interpret the play the same way an English audience would, like himself, but the elders explain many events according to their own beliefs. Rather than assuming others are wrong, communicators should recognize these differences and be willing to learn from other people. People can build a mutual understanding of cultures across the world, and it just makes us better communicators as humans when we do understand that these cultural differences. As for a personal experience, I traveled to Spain a few summers ago. I had the opportunity to meet other girls from the country. They didn't understand my American accent with certain things I would try to communicate to them. I can relate this to the story as the narrator assumed the Tiv people would understand Shakespeare from his perspective, kind of like how I assumed they would understand what I was saying as they understood the English language. For the most part, they could understand the English. My American accent acted as a communication barrier to talking to those from another culture. It's important, and it just served as a reminder to me to understand that others from across the world won't always understand things that you're used to. In conclusion, the most significant lesson I gained from this article is that humans from different parts of the world understand things differently from what I personally might hear living in America. When we approach communicating with those of a different cultural background with an open mind, it makes us better humans by not judging just because someone thinks differently than you. As from my own Christian worldview, I believe we should show others the love of Christ and make an effort to understand God's people. And just overall, this served as a reminder that it's about how we react to our differences as humans. We shouldn't judge, but we should just learn to be more understanding of the people around us.